The money came. But somehow, the peace never really followed. And if you know that feeling, this is why it happens. There's a moment almost no one talks about. Usually late at night, the room is quiet, the city glowing softly outside the window, while everything around you appears fine. And for some reason, you open the banking app again. Not because something is wrong, not really. It's more subtle than that. Something inside you. I just need to check. The balance is higher than it's ever been. Higher than the version of you from years ago once dreamed about. The apartment is nicer. The car is newer. The salary became real, and still, something feels unsettled. A low tension, sitting quietly underneath everything, like you're slightly behind. Even though nobody can clearly explain what is behind it. And that's the strange part. Externally, your life looks successful, maybe even impressive. You remember the number that used to feel impossible. The number you thought would finally change everything. Maybe you wrote it down somewhere. Maybe you carried it around in your head for years, thinking, when I get there, I'll finally relax. And eventually, you did get there. For a moment, it felt exactly the way you imagined. The first large paycheck felt heavy, important. You checked the account multiple times, just to make sure it was real. You walked differently that week, thought differently. The future finally felt open. But slowly, without announcement, life adjusted around it. The nicer apartment became normal. The upgraded flights started feeling reasonable. The expensive grocery store stopped feeling expensive. The standard changed. Quietly, and eventually, the number that once represented freedom started feeling ordinary. So the target moved. It always moves. That isn't greed, and it isn't a failure. It's something far more human than that. The brain adapts incredibly fast to improvement. Behavioral economists call it hedonic adaptation. But from the inside, it doesn't feel clinical. It feels like relief. That disappears the moment you finally touch it. The first paycheck opened a door. The latest raise simply maintained the room you were already standing in. And that distinction changes everything. Because every time income rises, lifestyle rises quietly alongside it. Not dramatically, almost invisibly. A slightly better neighborhood. A gym membership that costs a little more. Restaurants where $100 disappears casually during dinner. And nobody even reacts anymore. None of these decisions feel reckless by themselves. But together, they slowly raise the floor of your life. And once that floor rises, going backward no longer feels temporary. It feels like a loss. That's when psychology changes. The anxiety is no longer in the climb. It's in maintenance. Financial freedom once felt like a destination you were moving toward. Now, it feels more like a structure you're responsible for holding up every single month. The rent, the payments, the subscriptions, the standard of living that quietly formed around you while you were busy trying to succeed. And psychologically, holding something up creates a very different feeling than building toward something. One creates momentum, the other creates vigilance. Then comparison enters the picture, and this is where things become dangerous. Because income doesn't just change your account balance, it changes your environment. The people around you change. The conversations change. The expectations change. You enter rooms where success feels normal. Someone orders the expensive bottle without looking at the price. Someone casually mentions buying another property. Someone talks about burnout from managing multiple income streams. And suddenly, your own success starts feeling strangely small. Not because it actually is small, because your reference point shifted, without you realizing it. That's how relative wealth works. Human beings rarely measure success. Absolutely, we measure it socially, against the people around us, which means you can double your income and still emotionally feel behind. Not because the numbers say you are, because the environment quietly changed the definition of enough. And social media intensifies all of it. Late at night, the algorithm feeds you carefully curated evidence that someone else is further ahead. The founder who retired early. The creator earns passive income from somewhere coastal. The perfectly edited version of freedom. Compressed into 30 seconds. Logically, you understand these are fragments, highlights, moments detached from context. But emotionally, your nervous system still records them as comparisons, as distance, as evidence that maybe you still haven't arrived yet. And, eventually, the pressure stops being purely financial, it becomes personal. Because income slowly merges with identity. The promotions come, the title changes. People introduce you differently now. Family members mention your salary at gatherings. Your opinion suddenly carries more weight in rooms where you once stayed quiet. And without realizing it, you begin attaching your sense of self to the number itself. Your value, your trajectory, your place in the world. Which means, when the number fluctuates, your identity feels it too. A slower quarter, a missed target, an unexpected expense, a calendar invite from HR with no explanation. These stop feeling like ordinary financial moments. They begin feeling existential. That's the paradox almost nobody prepares you for. We pursue higher income searching for security, while higher income often increases what we feel obligated to protect. The lifestyle expands, the expectations rise, the comparison field widens, and the emotional payoff, the relief you thought would finally arrive, keeps drifting slightly out of reach. Almost always, early in life, money feels simple. It's about survival, rent, groceries, gas in the car. Then income grows, and money becomes comfort, convenience, choice. But eventually, it changes again. Money slowly becomes a scoreboard. The apartment becomes a signal. The car becomes a signal. The neighborhood becomes a signal. And scoreboards are dangerous. Because there is always someone ahead of you. Always, at higher income levels. The measuring stick quietly gets longer. You stop comparing yourself to your past. You start comparing yourself to the most successful people visible in your current world. Which means your actual progress remains real, while your emotional experience of that progress shrinks. And lifestyle inflation works the same way. It never announces itself. It arrives disguised as reasonable upgrades. The better seat on the flight, the expensive apartment, because the commute makes sense, the dinners, because networking matters now. Each decision feels logical, until eventually, your monthly life begins requiring the very income that once would have made you feel rich. And that creates exposure. Because now the machine has to keep running. Bonuses fluctuate, markets shift, industries change overnight. And suddenly, the life that was supposed to feel secure starts feeling expensive to maintain. That's why financial anxiety doesn't automatically disappear at higher income levels. Sometimes, it intensifies. Not because you failed, not because you're irresponsible, because there's simply more to sustain, more attached to the outcome. And beneath all of it, something deeper is happening. The pursuit of more slowly transforms into the pursuit of proof. Proof that you matter. Proof that you're progressing. Proof that you're not falling behind. But proof has no finish line. There is always another level, another benchmark, another person moving faster. So the nervous system never fully relaxes. And somewhere, deep down, part of you already knows this. Because money was never truly the thing you wanted. Not really. Money represented something underneath itself. Safety, freedom, recognition, belonging, relief. And when those deeper needs aren't addressed directly, income becomes a proxy solution for an emotional problem. The number rises, but the feeling never fully lands, like pouring water into a container, with a fracture you cannot see. And this cycle quietly repeats itself. Inside millions of lives, income rises, lifestyle expands, expectations climb, comparison widens, pressure increases, and the feeling of almost returns again. Meanwhile, the culture reinforces the cycle constantly. Ambition is celebrated loudly. Scaling is admired. Acceleration is rewarded. But contentment, real contentment, is almost invisible. It doesn't perform well online. It doesn't generate status. It doesn't announce itself, which means most people never actually see what enough looks like in real life. They only see escalation, so they continue accelerating past the life they originally wanted. And eventually, a strange realization begins forming. What if the problem was never the size of the income? What if enough was simply never defined? Because a finish line you never consciously define will move forever. If you don't decide what it means for your actual life, your environment will decide for you. Advertising will decide. Social media will decide. The people around you will decide. And none of those systems benefit from you arriving peacefully at enough. That's the shift that changes everything. Not financial, psychological. The moment you stop asking, how do I earn more? And start asking, what does my life actually need? Which expenses genuinely improve my daily experience? Which ones exist purely to maintain an image? What would happen if I stopped performing wealth and started building peace instead? Some people eventually make a quiet decision. They allow income to rise. Without allowing lifestyle to rise at the same speed, the surplus stops becoming new obligations and starts becoming space, options, breathing room, flexibility, because psychologically, options feel very different from obligations. Options feel like freedom. Obligations feel like exposure. And comparison never disappears completely. Human beings aren't built for that. But comparison can be redirected. Instead of measuring yourself against the most successful people around you, measure against your own history. 5 years ago, what kept you awake that no longer does? What freedoms exist in your life today that once felt impossible? That kind of perspective changes something internally. It softens the nervous system. And real perspective almost feels like rest. The deeper shift happens when income stops being tied directly to identity, when a bad month becomes a financial event instead of a personal collapse. That's when decisions become clearer. That's when ambition becomes intentional instead of compulsive. And, interestingly, the people who seem most financially at peace are rarely the highest earners in the room. They're usually the people who quietly decide what enough means. Before the world decided for them, they still work, still built, still growing, but they are no longer trying to outrun inadequacy. They move differently, more calmly, more deliberately, because they stopped expecting money to solve emotional questions money was never designed to answer. So, if you've been earning more every year, and the relief still hasn't arrived, you are not alone. You are experiencing something deeply human. The brain adapts, the environment shifts, the comparisons expand, and without conscious interruption, the cycle simply continues. Which is why maybe the most important financial question isn't, how much more do I need? Maybe it's this: what would finally feel like enough if more never arrived? Because sometimes, the most meaningful financial transformation a person can experience has very little to do with income itself, and everything to do with finally stepping outside the performance of endless accumulation. I'm curious, at what income level did money stop feeling simple for you? When did it shift from solving problems to create different ones? If this conversation felt familiar, Habit Wealth Stories is going to keep exploring the psychology behind money, ambition, status, and modern pressure. Subscribe if you want more conversations like this, because there's another part of this story almost nobody talks about. What happens when you finally define enough, and the entire world around you keeps insisting it isn't? That's where psychology becomes even more dangerous.